Hey everyone, so almost there, it's almost Friday. What I want to talk about today is reading comprehension or reading difficulties in general and understanding the difference whenever it's actually reading difficulties or understanding if there's something else going on. And this is really important to dig deeper if you have kind of done the tutoring, you've done the reading programs, and your child or you are not seeing the results you were hoping for. And so what you need to know is that if you're doing something over and over and over again and it's not working, you don't want to keep doing that. You want to shift into something, and I start identifying what are other things that can come into play. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm actually going to share 2 exercises and 1 supplement even that can help kind of start identifying and even addressing this issue. So I just want to say to start, I was a horrible reader in my formative years in earlier elementary school. So I know personally how hard it is whenever, both for your child, like the impact it has on your self-esteem, the frustration, how poor reading impacts everything else in terms of, your science, your social studies, even math, all of that other stuff. And the interesting thing is I didn't have a learning disability. I even was tested and they said, no, there is definitely no learning disability. There's nothing that's an issue that way. And what the real problem was is I had a hard time focusing. I was super creative, super imaginative, like a lot of kids who have, ADHD. And my mind was constantly going. But people back then in the 80s and today still are really not trained, or not, I don't want to say not trained. People are not always on the radar for those other factors that can come into play whenever it just seems really like a really obvious reading comprehension difficulty or reading disorder. So, the answer then is lots of practice and tutoring, and he or she's just weak and all of that type of stuff, right? Or we just say they're just not strong in reading. It's just not their strong suit. So the thing that you need to understand is that factors that can seriously impact a child's ability to learn to read well yeah, I'm just going to say that for now, that factors that can impact their ability to read well are things like anxiety, ADD, and SPD. And I say ADD because obviously ADHD will, but ADD is something that we don't usually use that term anymore, but I'm using it because most of us are familiar with it. So the kid who has a hard time focusing, but they might not seem hyper. And girls often fall under the radar with this. I did, right? Because I wasn't a behavioral problem in school, but I had a hard time focusing. My mind was constantly wandering. I was super imaginative and much rather be in my mind, imagining stories or scenarios or whatever than being in school and so forth, or doing the tasks that I have to do in school. And so if you've tried everything else, this could definitely be a factor. And the other thing I want to add in that was a huge eye-opener, whenever I was like about 10 years ago, I went for training and they were talking about kids that fly under the radar but actually have difficulties that can be really huge if we let it slide. And they were talking about girls and anxiety and how a lot of girls, not a lot of girls, but girls can have anxiety disorders, and the parents and the teachers can have no idea, because part of the anxiety disorder is wanting to give the image that everything is fine. So these are the kids will be sometimes really perfectionistic. They'll always be the kids who are not a behavior problem. They just really want to do well. And so it can look like a learning disability when in fact it's the anxiety, or in some cases ADD, or in other cases SPD, or all of the above, that's making it very difficult for them, perhaps in primary, to basically learn the skills they need to be able to read because they can't focus long enough. And if that seems hard to believe, have you ever been in a situation, and probably you're an adult, I'm sure you've been in an insanely stressful time in your life, whether you were burnt out, tragedy hit, insane overwhelm, and you found it hard to even focus long enough to read a paragraph. Like you found yourself having to read the paragraph. Let me know in the comments below whether you're watching live or replay if you've ever had this. And this is what it's like for these kids, right? So imagine they have insane anxiety and they can't focus on what the teacher says. They can't retain the phonic sounds because their brain is in such a state of stress. Or they're older, maybe they can decode, but they can't comprehend because they just can't focus long enough. And that can be because of anxiety. It can also be with kids who have sensory processing disorder, which sometimes is like mistaken as being ADHD or ADD. And if you're wondering how that can impact reading, I like to give this comparison. Imagine you're like on a train, a really noisy train, and the windows down and you can hear the racket in the engine from the outside, and it's just, the train is packed with people. There's people bumping into you. It's just bustling with noise, bustling with just sensory overload. There's so much going on, and you have to read something that's really dense, like a textbook on like neuroscience. Imagine how difficult that would be to be able to stay focused on a text that maybe you're not material you're not that comfortable with. That is what it can feel like for a kid who has sensory processing to try to retain the information, because they're not always able to filter out the background noise and the foreground and background noise and so forth. Everything just seems relevant. They're not filtering out relevant, non-relevant stimuli. And so they're just taking it all in, and it's just really overwhelming. And then there's kids, maybe flicking them and doing all this stuff. And that's a lot of classrooms today too, let's not forget, right? But these kids are just super sensitive. And so that's also some of the factors that can contribute to learning and reading difficulties. And then obviously, if you're ADHD, ADD, whatever you want to say, that's going to contribute to a big time difficulties with being able to focus long enough to, whether you're in primary and you're trying to learn phonic sounds, whether you're in grade 5 and you're trying to, understand the context or the text meaning of something that you're decoding. So it's really important to understand that. And then also I want to say poor reading comprehension can happen in situations where sometimes the child can decode. So parents will often say to me, well, my child can read, like they can decode, they just have really poor reading comprehension. So what I want to say that there's a few factors that can happen when that's coming into play. So number one is a child has a reading disorder that's totally legitimate, and they're using all of their working memory to decode. They're reading from the right side of their brain instead of their left, and it's causing reading comprehension difficulties. They can decode, they can't decode and retain at the same time because the wrong part of the brain is doing the work. Number two, they might have poor short-term memory. And so that's going to affect, obviously, the reading comprehension. They might, have some idea, but they're not able to sequence correctly or remember all the parts or, interpret really what's going on and go deeper into the text. And then number three is, like I said, there's ADHD, anxiety, SPD, all of the above, whatever, that's coming into play. And so the problem is that when a child has a reading difficulty, sometimes what happens is we start focusing on what I call the loudest symptom, or the most concerning symptom. We're like, oh my goodness, they have to know how to read. That's, so crucial for school, so crucial for life. This is a problem. We have to work on reading, when really we might need to go deeper. The reading is a symptom of something deeper going on. And this can be super frustrating for parents who aren't, aware of these factors, or even for teachers, and especially for parents who've dropped tons of money, they've done all these programs. It can really feel like you're starting to run out of options. Your child can really start to feel discouraged, shut down, right? I see this all the time, low self-esteem, all that type of stuff. And the key really is to screen for the weak areas in the brain. I work with a lot of parents. They're like, oh, I need to find out what's wrong. Like, what's the diagnosis? And totally, if you think that's going to be helpful, as a parent instinctively what your child needs and what you need to feel better and to move forward and so forth. But really what needs to happen, whether you decide to pursue a diagnosis or not, is you need to screen for the areas of the brain that are weak. And you might be wondering at this point, okay, so what are some clues that my child's reading difficulties could be beyond just reading difficulties? So I'm just going to list off a whole bunch of clues, and let me know if any of them resonate. Share in the comments below. And if you're getting about half or even a little less than half, that could be a pretty strong indication that something else needs to be addressed as well. And it's totally possible your child has a reading disorder as well as these issues. But I always look at this first. And if this is an issue, we have to address this in order for your child to learn better. So number one, is your child sensitive to sounds, textures, taste, or easily overwhelmed? Do they have poor focus? Do they have difficulty sitting still? Are they a daydreamer, right? I was like that. Good luck. Unless it's a super interesting book, it was going to be really hard for me to focus on like Treasure Island, right? Like a whole chapter of that. It was just not interesting enough for me. Are they highly imaginative? Do they notice details that other kids don't? Do they notice, hey, there was a sound, or there was a train going by? Or they just notice, someone always tends to wear shirts that, have slogans or patterns or whatever. Can they get really focused on one topic of interest? So they can focus, but it's like a hyper focus if they're super interested in something. Can they be also, be easily distracted? Do they go from one subject to another? Do they have a hard time focusing in other situations where they're not necessarily interested, or just a hard time focusing besides being focused on reading? Are they a worrier? And I say that with caution because I'm pretty sure my parents would never have defined me as a worrier. And I feel like the first 20 years of my life, I had a pretty serious anxiety disorder, but didn't even realize it. Like literally thought everything I was worried about was totally legitimate, and my reaction was totally legitimate. And I hid it because I don't know. I just felt like I didn't feel like something I needed to share. It is something that I just really want to stress is if your child, and I see this more with girls, is really perfectionistic and almost afraid to get in trouble, like to the point where it can be a bit extreme, or is always checking, is it okay? Is it okay? Is it okay? You might want to consider, is there a higher level of anxiety? And I'm not saying an anxiety disorder, but could that factor come into play? So let me know whether you're watching the live or the replay. Are you, does any of this clicking in terms of, oh man, this makes a lot of sense? In any case, when there is reading difficulties, I screen for this first. And if this is a factor, we need to address this first, regardless of, even if there is a true diagnosis of, say, dyslexia or visual processing going on, we have to address the anxiety, the ADHD, the SPD first, because if we don't address that, then we can do all the dyslexia brain training we can, but their focus is not going to be there. Or we can do all of the visual processing and vision exercises, but the focus is not going to be there. So basically, you need to, number one, identify the weak and underdeveloped connections in the brain. And the number two, you need to exercise them. So you're probably wondering, okay, where do I start? So good starting point, first of all, I'm going to give a suggestion. Do check with your doctor always when I talk about supplements, right? But I really am a fan of, I love GABA. It's an amino acid and it helps a lot of kids get focused and calm if they have anxiety, if they have OCD, great for ADHD. And so I do also, you do not want to give this to your child if they're on SSRI, so any anti-anxiety, depression medication, anything like that, or even ADHD medication, before checking with your doctor, because it does raise serotonin levels. But GABA is excellent for improving focus and reducing anxiety. So it can really help, and also sensory processing, it can really help a child to be able to get focused on the reading. I don't consider that a long-term solution. To me, that's not a root cause solution by supplementing or it's not going to be a cure-all. But if they're able to focus better and get more reading done by having that GABA, then you know that there could be something deeper going on here besides just difficulties with decoding or visual processing or phonemic awareness and all of that type of stuff. The two exercises that I recommend are, the number one, the Moreau. So that helps to take kids out of fight or flight. It's really a reflex that's commonly retained in a lot of my kids who have anxiety, who have ADHD, sensory processing, and so forth. And that is in my starter kit. So I'm going to post the link for that in the comments below if you want to grab that after. And the other one is the spinal galant. So the way to integrate the spinal galant reflex, which will contribute a lot to poor focus and fidgetiness and all that type of stuff, is you want to work on core strength. So you want to do Supermans. If they can't do Supermans, you want to have them do bird dogs to start. You want to work on core strength. That not only helps to improve focus, it also will help to stabilize the eyes if there's any visual processing issues, and improves posture. It's just a really good all-around reflex that you want to integrate. So let me know in the comments below if your child has, if this makes sense, if they're having reading comprehension issues or just reading issues in general, and you think there could be something deeper going on. And if you're interested in knowing more about my 6-month program, the Full Potential Formula, do reach out. I'll put a link for that in the comments below as well, and we can book a call and chat and so forth. So thanks for watching, everyone, and if you found this video helpful, do share it, tag someone you know who you know can benefit from hearing as well. Thanks, have a great day.